Welcome to rSlash Prorevenge, where a loyal employee gets fired and immediately makes the greedy company regret their decision. A while ago, I worked at a baseball store called Ball Mart, or a general goods store that sounded like that, not so long after the Great Recession of 2008, and management was trying to cut costs because of failing profit. One of the first things management did was fire 2 of the 3 full-time maintenance and cleaning guys. The one guy they kept, I'll call him maintenance guy, was amazing at his job. Everything in the store ran well because of him and his willingness to go beyond what was required to help people. A genuinely nice guy. For 6 months, management tried to make having 1/3 of a maintenance staff work, and it failed miserably. Maintenance guy couldn't do everything, and over time, management increasingly asked him to coordinate some part-timers that were supposed to do the cleanings and carts. He spent so much time coordinating that he had no time for maintenance. The night crew was also cut, so they couldn't pick up the slack. Then, 2 things happened within the space of a week that told management how important he was to the store running well. First, some cleaning machines broke down. Turns out they have to be properly cleaned weekly. If left alone, they come up real bad and parts wear out quickly. A several $1,000 repair bill because he was told to prioritize coordinating part-times over tinkering with machines. A few days later, the deli lady nearly quit after the blade on the deli slicer went flying off and could have cut her face badly. Turns out that the bolt that held it in place was loose, and maintenance guy had tightened it weekly for her. When he didn't have time to do that anymore, he told management it had to be replaced for safety. Well, management didn't do that because it cost money, but they told people it was fixed. That could have been a lawsuit or criminal charges. They and deli lady got lucky. So management sat down with him and asked him why things were going wrong. Maintenance guy told them point blank he needed enough time for maintenance and someone else had to coordinate the part-time cleaners and check up on them. They were rather lazy. Management called BS. They said maintenance should be easy and done quickly. Maintenance guy got mad because they insulted his professionalism and he pulled out his notebook from his back pocket. It turns out that over his 15 years, he had filled the book with charts, schedules, and diagrams of how to do his job and keep things running. There were over 100 things he checked weekly or monthly. There were a lot of machines he kept in running order. Some had certain things that were half broken and had to be wiggled in a certain way, etc. To be honest, a lot of these things were minor or major safety hazards, but over the years, management was fine with not replacing multi-$1,000 machines if maintenance guy knew how to keep them working. As well, he did things he should not have done, like calibrating machines for departments that should have done it themselves or contracted it out, etc. But he was a nice guy and he liked helping people. He told me that he spent about a half hour telling management about what he did, and he suspected that until then, nobody had ever known how much he did. Well, he may have said a few swear words and derogatory things while telling management why he needed time to do stuff. It was not a good moment for him, and he was pissed. At the end, he put his notebook back in his pocket and offered to take a week to write up everything he knew so that management would have written proof of why his job mattered in case a higher up asked why they increased maintenance costs when corporate was demanding they cut costs. The multiple managers in the room looked at each other and asked him to leave so they could talk in private. He told me several years later when I ran into him somewhere and had lunch with him that he had a premonition as he walked out of the room. So he went to the back room and tossed his notebook in the garbage compactor. For good measure, he then went around the store and emptied all the garbage cans and tossed those bags in so his notebook was properly buried. He was fine with it. All that information was in his head. After a few minutes later, management called him back. They told him that they could not allow him to keep working there because of the level of insubordination he had showed. They said as soon as he surrendered his badge, box cutter, and notebook, he would be escorted out of the building by security. They basically treated him like a criminal. Most fired people are not escorted out unless they were suspected of committing a crime that could not be proved. He handed over his badge and box cutter. They asked for the notebook. He said he threw it in the compactor. Their eyes went wide and they asked why he threw it out. He said he thought he was going to write everything up nicely on the computer from memory, so he thought he was done with the notebook. At this point, management starts looking at each other worried because they had intended to take the book, fire him, and have a less subordinate part-timer who doesn't get expensive benefits like a full-timer do his job. Now they couldn't. One of the managers suggested that he be allowed to write up the info before being escorted out. The others agreed. He was given the chance to be unfired just long enough to give them the info. How kind. He laughed and walked out, head held high, and management followed him to his car to make sure he left. I don't have exact numbers, but I guesstimate the store had to spend at least $20,000 or $30,000 to replace stuff that maintenance guy had kept working beyond the equipment's lifespan. And the new guy they hired had a heck of a time figuring out how things worked. To be honest, in a few cases, maintenance guy had gone too far, like creating fire hazards by taping broken chargers together after rewiring them instead of tossing them. But management had never complained when he saved them money. There was also a lot of things that should have been done by the health and safety team or the departments, but they also never complained about having less work. I asked him if throwing out that notebook was illegal, but he said it was personal property to help him remember things. It was not a work-provided notebook. He was proud of what he did. His pride clearly showed in how he told the story. He said that nobody is allowed to question his professional judgment by implying he is lazy. I agree. Does anyone else feel like modern corporations are basically choosing beggars? Good morning, employee. You're fired. But before we escort you off the property like a common criminal, give us your personal property so that we can pay your replacement even less than we were paying you to do your job. I found this comment in the same thread and I felt like I had to add it. Lady at a previous job ended up making an Access database for her job on her laptop, and she also put a copy on her password protected computer. They were looking to phase out her department and move it to a new building, so they pretty much kept everyone but her and another person out of the 8 that was working there. Since other coworkers were using her database to find and retrieve things easier, no one really thought that she made it and pretty much had the only access to it. She ended up deleting her database on her work computer when she reformatted it and took her laptop with her when she left. The company was pissed off and didn't realize that it was over 15 years worth of work on that database and was forced to go back to digging through the cabinets of paper records to find stuff. She put a ton of time off the books putting all that data into her records, and it was funny when the company was wanting to sue her for the loss. She replied that if they would like her to recreate the database, that she would be glad to, and submitted them an invoice for how much it cost her off the clock to make it in the first place. The company said no. Yep, I was right. This is classic choosing beggar behavior. How entitled do you have to be to sue someone because they don't give you their personal property? I was married to a very OCD and pragmatic man. For example, for him, a big romantic gesture had been to leave me alone for 24 hours at the hospital right after I had our son, so he could go pay bills and mow the lawn. 20 years later, I do understand he really did express his love this way, but that's another story. I was in dire need of physical contact because he never touched me unless he wanted very bland sex, and also never ever kissed me. The story is not about him, it's only a preamble. So I divorced him. Not just for what's above, mind you. I felt alone and unloved in this relationship. I just wrote about it to explain the state of mind I was in when I met this other person that we'll call PS. PS was the total opposite. He was very in tune with his emotions. He was very, very intense. This will be important later. He really expressed love like I thought I needed. On our first date, the waitress asked how long we had been together since he was so into me and touching me. He made me feel amazing. He had a huge house and a rather flashy lifestyle, so I assumed he was really well off. He told me he owned a car wash and a phone marketing company. Fast forward a bit. At this point, we had been dating for about a year and he had just asked me and my son to move in with him. I wasn't 100% sure, but he prepared the room for my son nonetheless. As I started spending more time in his house, still keeping mine, I also started to see strange behavior. He'd be up all night, but sleep all day. I also overheard a few phone calls where he was telling people they owed money and needed to pay, but the conversations didn't fit with the car wash or phone marketing business. At some point, he told me he was having money problems. He said huge clients were late in paying and that it was jeopardizing his house payments. So I, stupid me, offered to help. I'm missing a part of this story because it started as me offering help with the house since we were there a lot. Still had my house though, but it ended up with me lending him $25,000. I cannot for the life of me remember that progression. The loan was supposed to be for 3 weeks. I'd have it all back in 3 weeks. 3 weeks. That $25K came from my retirement savings and my son's college money, so I had to pay a fine to access it. It's also money it took me 10 years to put aside. That money was very important to me. During those 3 weeks, I went out to have drinks with my friends and found him on a date with another woman. I saw him French kissing another woman. I said nothing, went to his house, packed my stuff, and left. So anyway, I thought he'd be an adult and would still reimburse me the $25K at the end of this 3 weeks. Big mistake. Someone I knew told me he was glad I left and proceeded to tell me about him. He said PS was a junkie hooked on GHB, hence why he was so intense and so into his emotions. That also explained the erratic sleep and night patterns, but the final blow was when he told me PS was also a con man. A specialist in defrauding other people by phone, his so-called phone marketing company. In the beginning, I wasn't sure I believed it, but then bits of what I had overheard in the last year started to make sense, and I realized it was all true. Back to this later. I tried having my money back many different ways. None worked. I was at the end of my rope, and since it was in my years post-divorce and right after the 2008-2009 economic crash as well, I was poor as heck. So this is what I did. First, he had given me access to pay bills online, not to his bank accounts, but to his emails, so I was able to investigate all his accounts with the same password. I printed and screenshotted every little bit of information relating to money. I found proof that he was indeed scamming people and found the people he worked with and even the name of the person at Western Union who facilitated the money transfer. I found out he was an organized criminal. I also found out he did this between 2 countries. I started preparing Strike One. Strike One. So for Strike One, I printed his face and the face of everyone working for and with him from their online profiles in defrauding people and left hundreds of flyers in his neighborhood. I also called the hotline for financial crime prevention in both countries and gave very specific details and names. Know that even if he had given me the money, this goes against my core values and I would have done the same thing either way. At this point, I was also preparing Strike Two. Strike 2. I was dumb in lending him money, but at least I did it in the right way. I wrote a check. I didn't do cash. I wanted proof just in case. It would turn out to be a great idea. On the check, I had written that it was a loan. Thank you, Judge Judy, for this tip. Since he didn't pay me back, I prepared an invoice and sent it to me from his hacked email. When the time came to do my taxes, I filed the $25K as an expense using his invoice. I have many freelancers. I slid him in as one of them, and it passed. Don't ask me how I got his social security number, I can't remember, but I ended up having access to it, so I ratted him out to the IRS for hiding income. I found out later on through friends that the IRS started investigating him for unpaid taxes. I heard he had to pay 38% taxes on that $25K pay and a 20% fine for not declaring income. At this point, I was satisfied. I figured $9,500 in taxes plus $5K in fines was 50% of what he owed me. At least he didn't get away with it all. But remember I told you on the check I had written that it was a loan? So I took about 2 to 3 years, but I took him to court and won. He didn't even show up. So he has to reimburse me the full $25K plus court fees. Plus what he owes to the IRS. So it's $39,500 that he was to pay for not reimbursing the $25K. To this day, I still haven't seen a cent, but the rest of the story makes it worthwhile. For a while, I thought the financial crime call I made had no effect. Now, the cherry on top. What I didn't know at the time is that the IRS would team up with the wire fraud division and look at everything he did. They were not able to catch him on the wire fraud, but since the house he had did not fit with the money he was declaring, they got him on tax evasion and gave him a certain delay to pay back taxes. I heard it was only 3 months, but I don't know if it's accurate. They got him so good. They ended up freezing his accounts and he lost his house. The bank foreclosed it, and his debt to the IRS is still open. We are not in the US, so he won't go to jail for this, however. But my $25K that he did not want to repay ended up costing him over $500,000. And since you cannot go bankrupt for a debt you owe to the government, I am happy to tell you that at 40 years old, he had to move back with his parents and ask for welfare, and will probably be paying for this the rest of his life. The story is not finished, however. I just learned that he now has a job as a concierge in the apartment building of his parents, so I'll be contacting the court to have the money he owes me taken directly from his pay. The thing is, he has no idea I'm the culprit of all this bad fortune, and he recently sent me a message telling me he misses me and I was an angel for him and that he regrets what he did. Well, not me, loser. Not me. I have a sneaking suspicion that the reason why he reached back out to OP was because he's in deep debt and he's suddenly feeling strong feelings for people who bailed him out of debt in the past. I really love you and I miss all the money, all the time that we spent together. Can you please give me another chance? That was rSlash Prorevenge, and if you enjoyed this video, please hit that like button because it really does help me out.